She found the
I need the
sticky note on a
package
Tuesday
now.
morning.
I don't
The
know
way
you.
you find things
You
you
don't
didn't
have a
mean to
choice.
keep tucked
It's in
between
the
an
back.
old receipt and a coupon
They're
for
coming.
soup
We have to go now.
she couldn't afford
Get
anyway.
in. I'll cover you.
The
Hurry.
handwriting was hers.
Go!
The math was simple.
It hurts so
the
much.
answer was the kind
know.
that sits
Stay
in
with
your
me.
chest like a
I can't
stone you
breathe.
can't put
We're
down.
almost there.
Vera Hollis stood at her kitchen counter in Columbus, Ohio in the gray light of an October morning and looked at the numbers she had written the night before. Not because she needed to look at them again, she had them memorized. She just kept hoping that if she stared long enough, they would rearrange themselves into something survivable. Heart medication, $186. Money left in checking, $214. Food for the week, $28 if she was careful. If she bought the medication, she could eat. Barely. $4 a day. Bread, peanut butter, maybe a can of soup if it was on sale. If she skipped the medication, she could eat like a normal human being for 1 week. And then her heart would remind her in the blunt and non-negotiable language of arrhythmia exactly what skipping looked like. She circled the word meds with a pen that was almost out of ink. Then she folded the note once and tucked it into her purse next to her wallet and the photo of her daughter that she kept in a cracked plastic sleeve because she hadn't gotten around to replacing it, and maybe because the crack felt honest. She opened the refrigerator, half a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter with maybe 3 spoonfuls left, a can of soup with a dent in the side that the grocery store had marked down to 60 cents. She had bought it 3 weeks ago and kept telling herself she was saving it for when she really needed it. She had needed it for 3 days now. She closed the refrigerator. There is a particular kind of hunger that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't growl the way it does when you've missed a meal on a busy day when you skipped lunch because a meeting ran long and dinner is only 2 hours away. This kind is quieter. It settles into the background of everything a low hum. You start to stop noticing the way you stop noticing traffic outside your window or the sound of the heat clicking on at night. Vera had stopped noticing it sometime around Sunday. She was 61 years old. She had worked 31 years total in this city, 24 of them in the cafeteria at Truman Elementary School on the west side of Columbus. She had worn the same style of red apron every single day. She had learned every child's name within the first 2 weeks of each school year. She had never, not once in 24 years, let a child stand at the end of that line with an empty tray. She had retired 3 years ago when the school district restructured and her position was reclassified and her pension was reduced by a percentage that sounded small in the letter they sent her and felt enormous every month when she sat down to pay her bills. Her husband Gerald had died 4 years before that. Heart failure. The same thing that was now trying to claim her in its slower, more bureaucratic way. Her daughter Pam lived in Portland. They talked on the phone every Sunday. Vera always said she was fine. She had been saying she was fine for so long that she no longer noticed the distance between the word and the truth. She put on her coat. She picked up her purse. She walked the 6 blocks to Rexford Pharmacy because her car had needed a repair she couldn't afford in August, and she had been walking everywhere since. The October air was cold and flat and honest. Leaves scraped along the sidewalk. An old man on a porch across the street lifted his coffee mug in a small salute as she passed. She raised her hand back. These were the small ceremonies that held a life together when the larger ones had stopped. She had been rationing her medication for 11 days. She had told herself it wasn't that dangerous, that she was only taking half doses, that she was being careful, that she was being smart, that plenty of people manage conditions like hers without perfect pharmaceutical compliance. She had read enough online to build a convincing argument. She had not read enough online to believe it. The truth, the one she kept under the others like a stone under other stones, was that she was frightened. Not of dying exactly, more of what it would look like. The apartment found too late, Pam getting the call at work. The specific cruelty of a life that had been spent in the service of other people's children, ending alone in a second-floor apartment in Columbus with an empty refrigerator and a can of dented soup she had been saving for the right moment. She pushed through the door of Rexford Pharmacy at 10 minutes past 6 in the evening. The store was that particular shade of fluorescent that makes everyone look a little unwell. The kind of light that flattens faces and drains color and makes you aware of how tired you actually are. There were 4 people ahead of her in line at the pharmacy counter. A young mother with a toddler on her hip. 2 men in work clothes who had clearly come straight from a job site. An older man in a cardigan who was doing something complicated with a coupon. Vera stood behind them and held her purse with both hands and looked at the medication bags lined up behind the counter and thought about the sticky note folded in her wallet. The pharmacist working the counter was tall and lean, somewhere in his early 40s, with close-cropped, dark hair and the careful, economical movements of someone who had learned long ago that a calm exterior costs you nothing and gives the people in front of you something to hold on to. His name tag said Emmett. He worked through the line with a quiet efficiency that wasn't unfriendly, just focused. When Vera reached the counter, she gave her name. Emmett typed it in. He found her prescription. He told her the total. She handed him her card. The machine beeped once. Declined. She asked him to try again. The way you ask, keeping your voice level, keeping your eyes somewhere neutral, because asking is what you do when you know there is no money but you are not yet ready to accept that in front of strangers. The machine beeped again. Declined. She shifted her weight. She opened her wallet. She looked at what was inside, which was not enough. She told him to try one more time. Sometimes the machine, she said. Sometimes it just... The machine beeped a third time. The sound was not loud, but in the way that certain silences amplify certain sounds, it was the loudest thing Vera had heard in weeks. The man in line behind her work boots, weathered jacket hands that had spent decades doing physical work shifted. Not rudely, just the involuntary shift of a person waiting. Emmett looked at the screen. He looked at Vera. His face did not change, not visibly, but something behind it did. Something went very still. He said, "Ms. Hollis, do you want to step to the side for just a second?" Vera said, "No, I can fix it. I just need to..." She didn't know what she needed, a different number in her account, a different month, a different version of the last 3 years. Emmett said, "It's okay, we'll figure it out." Vera's throat tightened. She hated this. Not Emmett. Emmett was doing everything right. She hated the exposure of it, the public arithmetic of not having enough, the way the fluorescent lights seemed to lean in. She had spent 24 years making sure children never felt this way in her cafeteria. She had no idea it felt exactly like this. She pressed her hands flat against the counter because they had started to tremble. The man behind her, the one in the work boots, stepped slightly forward, not to push, just to close the gap between standing in line and being involved. Emmett turned to him. "Sir, give her a minute." The man's hands came up, palms out. Not aggressive. The gesture of someone who wasn't trying to make anything worse. "I'm just standing here." Emmett said, "I know." He turned back to Vera. "Do you have another card?" She shook her head. Once. Small. Any cash. She thought of the 220s in her wallet, which she needed for exactly 4 other things. She looked at the bag with her medication in it, the bottle inside, the number on the screen. She said, "I'll put it back." The words came out steady. She was proud of that and ashamed of being proud of it and ashamed of both. Emmett looked at her for a long moment. His expression was the kind that people work very hard to keep professional, and under the professionalism was something else. Something that looked, if you knew what you were looking for, like recognition. He said, "Ms. Hollis, when did you last eat?" The question landed in the pharmacy like a stone dropped in still water. The tech behind the counter stopped typing. The man in work boots went very quiet. Vera's first instinct was a reflex she had spent a lifetime building. Say fine. Say earlier today. Say something that keeps the shape of okay intact, that doesn't require anyone to rearrange themselves on your behalf. But the reflex was tired. 3 days tired, and Emmett was looking at her with the kind of stillness that made lying feel like more work than it was worth. Her shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. "I don't remember," she said. Then quieter, 3 days, maybe. She expected something: pity, discomfort, the particular awkwardness of someone confronted with need they didn't plan for. She had seen it before on the faces of parents who realized one of their children was getting help they didn't know about, the involuntary flinch that came before the gratitude. Emmett's face did not flinch. It did the opposite. It went somewhere harder and quieter, and the thing behind his eyes was not pity. It was closer to anger, the kind that isn't aimed at the person in front of you, but at everything that created the moment you're both standing in. He said, "Okay." His voice shifted into something different, not softer, more direct. "Sit down, please. Right now." Vera started to say she was fine. He pointed to the row of chairs along the wall. "Please." She took 2 steps toward the chairs and the floor tilted. It was subtle the way these things start, not dramatic but insistent, the way the body states its case without asking permission. Her vision narrowed at the edges, a dark frame pulling inward. Her stomach turned over once. Her hand reached for the wall and found air. Emmett came around the counter in 3 steps. His hand caught her shoulder, one steady grip, the other guiding her down into the chair. With the practice of someone who had done this before and never once gotten used to it. "Breathe," he said, low. "You're safe. Just breathe." She breathed. The dark frame pulled back. The floor leveled out. Her heart was doing something wrong and fast in her chest, the familiar wrongness she had been managing alone for 11 days with half doses and stubbornness. She whispered, "I can't afford an ambulance." Something moved in Emmett's jaw. He said, "I didn't say ambulance." He turned to the tech. "Get her water." He looked back at Vera. "I'm going to ask you something and I need the truth," she nodded. "Do you live alone?" "Yes." "Is there someone who can bring you food tonight?" The question was simple. The silence after it was enormous. Vera looked at her hands. She thought of Pam in Portland. She thought of the neighbor she waved to but didn't know. She thought of the Sunday calls where she said fine and meant it less each week. "No," she said. Emmett exhaled through his nose. Long, controlled. The breath of someone keeping professionalism intact by a deliberate act of will. He said, "Okay, just that." But it didn't sound like dismissal. It sounded like a door closing on one way of handling this and opening on another. He straightened up. He walked back behind the counter. He opened a small cabinet under the register and came back with a pack of crackers, the kind they kept for patients who had just had blood drawn or vaccines administered. He handed it to her without making a production of it, the way you hand someone a tool they need nothing more. She took it. Her hands moved on their own. The first cracker hit her system like the first match struck in a cold room. The second one made her dizzy in a different way, relief which is not always gentle. The man in the work boots had not left. He was still standing near the counter in the patient, unhurried way of someone who had decided something and was waiting for the right moment to act on it. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, she thought, big through the shoulders, hands with old scars across the knuckles, the kind that come from decades of working with metal and machinery rather than anything worse. He wore a jacket with patches on it, but she was looking at the crackers and didn't register them clearly. He stepped closer, stopped at a respectful distance. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was lower than she expected. "Careful. You're telling me you haven't eaten in 3 days." Vera swallowed. The shame came back like a reflex. "It's not I'm managing." "I know," he said. "That's the problem." She looked up at him. "Name's Slade," he said. "I'm not asking you for anything. I just need to know something." Emmett looked at the man from behind the counter, not suspicious. The way you look at someone when you're trying to take their full measure quickly. Slade said, "Where do you live?" Vera blinked. "Why?" His eyes moved briefly to the medication bag behind the counter, her bag still on the shelf. "Because that number on that screen shouldn't be the thing that decides whether you make it to next week." Vera felt her throat close. "Please don't." "Don't what?" "Make it a thing. I don't want—" She stopped. "I don't want people." Emmett said from behind the counter gently, "Ms. Hollis." He paused. "You're already in a thing. You're just in it alone." Something about that particular arrangement of words opened a small crack in the careful structure she had been maintaining. Not widely, just enough for air to get through. Slade looked at her for a moment longer. Then he said, "I'll be right outside." He turned and walked toward the front of the store. Through the glass door, she watched him step into the parking lot and take out his phone. He stood in the cold with his back to the door. He was out there for maybe 3 minutes. She could see his breath. When he came back in, he didn't say what he'd done. He came back to where she was sitting, and he stuttered there, not hovering, not performing concern, just present the way certain men are present when they've made a decision and are waiting for what comes next. Vera looked at him. "What did you just do?" she asked. "Made sure this doesn't end with crackers," he said. She shook her head. "I don't know you." He looked at her. His expression shifted slightly, the way a face shifts when it touches something it wasn't expecting to find. Something internal, not quite pain, more like the surface of an old memory that hasn't lost its texture. "You don't have to know me," he said. "You just have to get through tonight." Vera looked at the crackers in her hand. She looked at the bag behind the counter with her name on it. She looked at the sticky note she could feel folded in her wallet, the one with the math she had been living inside of for weeks. She had spent 24 years making sure no child in her cafeteria knew what this felt like. She had been very thorough. She had been very good at it. She had been so committed to making sure other people didn't feel this, that she had never prepared herself for the possibility that one day she would be sitting in a pharmacy chair, 3 days hungry, watching a stranger make a phone call on her behalf in a cold parking lot. She ate the last cracker. Emmett came back around the counter and crouched down in front of her, not in the dramatic way but in the practical way, to get his eyes level with hers without looming. He said, "I need to ask you some medical questions. Routine. Is that okay?" She nodded. "Are you diabetic?" "Borderline. And you're supposed to take your heart medication with food." Not a question. He already knew. "Yes," she said, his eyes tightened. Not at her. At the situation, at the specific grinding systemic machinery that creates moments like this one, that takes a woman who spent 24 years feeding other people's children and leaves her sitting in a pharmacy chair rationing her own medication. "Okay," he said, "we're going to fix that." She looked at him. "How?" He straightened up. He looked at her the way people look at you when they are about to say something true that they have been carrying for a while. "I'm going to look at your prescription history tonight," he said. "I'm going to contact your prescriber tomorrow morning and talk about alternatives on the formulary. I'm going to find the manufacturer assistance paperwork for your current medication. I can't promise range fast, but I can promise I'll try." Vera's throat ached in the specific way it does when someone does something for you that you needed for a long time and thought you were going to have to do without. "Why would you do all that?" she asked. Emmett looked at her. He hesitated. Just long enough, not dramatically, not artificially, but the real hesitation of someone approaching the edge of something they had not planned to say tonight. "Because I'm tired of watching people collapse quietly," he said. And then before she could ask what he meant, before she could look at him long enough to find what was underneath those words, there was a shift in the air of the store. Not sound yet, something before sound. A change in pressure, almost the way certain weather announces itself before it arrives. Emmett felt it too. She saw him look up, saw his posture change by a fraction, shoulders setting, chin lifting slightly, the body reading the environment before the mind has fully processed it. Then it became sound, low at first, below conversation level, below the hum of the pharmacy refrigerators and the overhead lights. A vibration more than a sound, the kind of thing that registers in your chest before your ears process it. Then louder. Vera's eyes moved to the front windows. In the parking lot, headlights appeared. Not one pair, not two, many. They swept across the glass in slow, organized arcs, each one followed by another, and under the light was sound deep and mechanical, and building the unmistakable percussion of multiple large engines running in low-controlled unison. Vera's hand tightened on the arm of the chair. Slade, who was still standing nearby, turned his head slowly toward the windows. He did it the way someone turns toward a sound they have been expecting, listening for the texture of it, counting without visibly counting. Emmett stood behind the counter, and his posture changed further, fully upright, now watchful. He said to Slade quietly, "What is that?" Slade looked at him. His voice was calm, completely, deliberately calm. "That's them," he said. The engines cut off one after another in a sequence that was somehow orderly even in its staggering number. The silence that followed was different from the silence before they arrived. It had weight. It had the specific quality of things that are about to happen rather than things that are already happening. The front door of Rexford Pharmacy slid open. Cold air rolled in from the parking lot, and then the first one walked through, helmet in hand, beard shot through with gray, eyes that moved around the room once professionally and then settled. He walked with the weight of someone who had stopped trying to take up less space a long time ago. Not aggressively, but the way a mountain doesn't apologize for being large. He wore a leather vest over a flannel shirt. On the back of the vest was a patch Vera could see even from the chair, the distinctive death's head insignia, the words above and below it, Hell's Angels. Then another man came through the door, then another, then three more. The pharmacy was not a small space, but it became one. Not from crowding, they were disciplined, spreading out rather than clustering, but from the gravity of their presence, the accumulated weight of that many people who have decided to do something. Vera felt fear move through her like cold water. Her brain was doing what brains do when they pattern match faster than context can intervene. She saw the patches and she felt what culture had told her to feel about those patches, and the adrenaline that had been trying to surface for 3 days found a sudden available channel. Emmett moved. He came around the counter and stepped to a position just slightly in front of Vera's chair. He did it without making a show of it, without looking at her to check if she noticed. The way certain people move when they have decided that whatever happens next, they are going to be between it and someone who cannot be between it themselves. The first man, the one with the gray shot beard, approached Slade, stopped a few feet away, said one word. "Groceries," Slade said. "Yeah." The man turned and looked at Vera. His expression did something Vera had not expected. It softened, not into pity, not into performance, into something more specific. He looked at her the way you look at someone's mother, someone's aunt, someone who has been strong in a particular way for a very long time and it has cost something. He kept his distance, he kept his voice level. "Ma'am," he said, "we're not here to frighten you." Vera's voice came out thin. "Then why are you here?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her the way someone looks at a person they have traveled a long distance to find, not with urgency, but with the specific gravity of arrival, as if the answer to her question was something he had been carrying for longer than tonight, and the weight of it was still present even now that he was here. "Give me just a moment, ma'am," he said quietly, "and I'll tell you everything." And Vera felt, for reasons she could not yet name, that the answer was going to change something she hadn't known could still be changed. The word came a moment later, simple, and without decoration dropped into the silence of the pharmacy like a stone finding the bottom of still water. "Because you're hungry." It landed differently than she expected. Not because we heard you needed help, not because someone called us, not the language of charity or obligation or the careful phrasing of people who want credit for showing up. Just because you're hungry, as if it were a fact of geography, as if hunger were a coordinate, and they had simply navigated to it. Vera looked at this man, this large, gray-bearded, leather-vested man standing in a pharmacy in Columbus, Ohio at 6:50 in the evening, and she did not know what to do with him. Her whole life she had known what to do with people. 24 years of reading faces across a cafeteria counter, knowing which child needed an extra scoop and which one needed you to look away while you gave it to them. She had always known what to do. She did not know what to do with this. He did not push. He did not fill the silence with explanation or justification. He just stood there in the way of someone who understood that the next move belonged to her, and he was content to wait as long as it took. Behind him, more of them had filed in. She counted without meaning to count. 8 near the front. More in the aisles. She could see through the glass doors that there were still men outside standing near their bikes, not milling but stationed, the organized stillness of people following a plan. Emmett had not moved from his position in front of her chair. He was watching the man watching all of them with the focused, calibrated attention of someone who had decided not to react but was prepared to if the calculation changed. The man with the gray beard looked at Emmett. "You the pharmacist?" "I am." "She's got medication waiting." Emmett paused for one beat. "That's between me and my patient." The man nodded, as if that were the right answer, as if he'd been testing for exactly that response and was satisfied with the result. "Fair enough," he said. He reached into his vest and produced nothing, yet just rested his hand there waiting. He looked back at Vera. "My name's Garrett. I run this chapter." He said it the way you state a fact that has no agenda behind it. "You don't have to talk to me. You don't have to accept anything. But I'd like to tell you why we're here if you're willing." Vera looked at Slade. Slade gave her the smallest nod, the nod of someone saying, "I know this is a lot. I know it doesn't look like what it is. Give it another minute." She looked back at Garrett. "All right," she said. Garrett said, "Slade called us, told us a woman hadn't eaten in 3 days, needed heart medication, and was trying to handle it alone." He paused. "We don't leave that alone." "You don't know me," Vera said. "No," Garrett said, "but we know what that looks like. And we know what it peeds." From somewhere near the front of the store movement, a woman came through the door carrying 2 large paper bags, one in each arm, moving with the efficient purpose of someone who knew exactly where she was going. She was somewhere around 50, compact and direct with short hair and the kind of face that had stopped performing patience a long time ago and wore its real expressions instead. She wore the same leather vest. She set the bags down on the end of the pharmacy counter and went back outside without a word. Then another man brought two more bags. Then a box. Then another. The bags and boxes accumulated on the counter with a quiet, accumulating weight. Not random snacks, not gas station food, but real groceries. Vera could see the shapes of things through the paper. Bread, a carton of eggs, fruit, the rectangular solidity of rice and pasta boxes. Soup cans lined up like a small, serious army. Vera watched this happen and felt something she could not immediately name. It was not gratitude or not only gratitude. It was something more destabilizing than that. It was the sensation of having a wall you had been leaning against for so long you forgot it was there, suddenly proved that it had been holding your weight all along. The woman came back inside and walked directly to Vera. She stopped at a respectful distance, but her eyes were warm and direct, and they did not perform warmth. They simply had it. "My name's Ren," she said. "Can I set some of this down somewhere for you?" Vera said, "I can't pay you." Ren shook her head. "We didn't bring a receipt." "I don't understand why." "I know you don't," Ren said. "That's okay. You don't have to understand it tonight." She tilted her head slightly. "Is it okay if I sit here?" She gestured to the chair 2 seats down from Vera's, as if she were asking permission to enter a space that belonged to Vera, not to the pharmacy, not to the general public. Vera's space specifically. Vera nodded. Ren sat down. She did not immediately speak. She let the room do what it was doing, the organized movement of men carrying groceries. The low murmur of instructions. Vera couldn't fully make out Emmett watching from behind the counter with an expression she still could not entirely read. After a moment, Ren said, "You worked in a school cafeteria." Vera looked at her. "How do you—" "Slade told Garrett. Garrett told us." Ren's voice was matter-of-fact, not intrusive. "He said you were the kind of person who made sure the hungry kids didn't feel like hungry kids." Vera was quiet. "I wasn't from your school," Ren said. She reached down and pushed up the left sleeve of her jacket. On the inside of her wrist, there was a small tattoo, simple lines unmistakable in shape. A lunch tray. The kind with the divided sections. The kind that sat in every school cafeteria in every public school in America. Different county, but the woman at my school— Ren looked at the tattoo for a moment. "She did the same thing. You learn something when someone treats you with dignity when they don't have to. You don't forget it." Vera looked at the tattoo, then at Ren's face. "I did that for a lot of kids," Vera said. "I know," Ren said. "That's the point." Garrett had moved to the counter. He was looking at the medication bag on the shelf, the one with Vera's name on it. He looked at Emmett. "What's the total?" Emmett's jaw worked slightly. He was navigating something, the professional architecture of patient privacy, against the obvious and immediate reality of the situation. He said, "Sir, there are—" "I understand," Garrett said. His voice was not impatient. It was the voice of someone who has heard the rules and is not asking to break them, just asking the person enforcing them to look at the room and decide what matters. "What's the total?" Emmett looked at Vera. She gave a small nod, barely perceptible, the surrender of someone who has run out of energy to protect a pride that wasn't serving her. "386, Emmett said. Garrett's jaw tightened. Just for a moment. The compression of something felt but not performed, the specific reaction of a man who knows what $386 means to a woman who hasn't eaten in 3 days. He glanced at Slade. Slade gave a single nod, not of permission, but of confirmation. The nod of two people who understand each other across a room without needing the room to hear it. Garrett reached into his vest. He placed cash on the counter. He did it without display. The way you place something down when you have carried it for a purpose and the purpose has arrived. Vera came forward in her chair. "No, please, Slade's voice came from her left. Gentle but firm, the gentleness of someone who knows you need to hear this and is going to say it clearly once. "Stop," she stopped. He said, "You're not taking from us. You're receiving. There's a difference. We're different." She looked at him. He met her eyes and held them without pressure, without performance, without the slight lean-in of someone waiting to be thanked. He was just stating a fact that he believed completely. Emmett stood behind the counter, looking at the palm and looking at Garrett and looking at the general situation with the expression of a man running a rapid internal calculation between what was right and what the handbook said. Garrett said, "If you need a name for the receipt, put community." Emmett swallowed. He stood there for one more moment. Then he nodded and picked up the pishamos and began processing the transaction with the focused movements of someone who had made a decision and was not going to second-guess it. The tech bagged the medication with the careful attention of someone who understood in this particular moment that what they were bagging mattered. Vera watched the bag come off the shelf, watched it be folded closed, watched it slide across the counter toward her. She had been looking at that bag for 45 minutes, and it had been on the other side of an impossibility. Now it was in front of her. She put her hand on it. Garrett said, "We're going to get you home, and we're going to get your refrigerator right." Vera looked up at him. "I don't even know how to—" She stopped, started again. "Why are you doing this for me?" Ren answered before Garrett could. "Because we've been where you are." Vera looked at her. "No offense, but you don't know where I am." Ren didn't flinch. Her eyes were steady and without defensiveness. "You're a woman who's been telling everyone she's fine while she starves. You're a woman who made sure other people never felt this, and now you're sitting in it alone and you don't know how to ask for help because you never had to learn." She paused. "We know that place." The words were quiet. They were not an argument. They were an identification. And there is something that happens when someone identifies the exact shape of the thing you have been carrying. It doesn't necessarily lighten it, not immediately, but it changes the weight of it because weight borne alone was different from weight that has been witnessed. Vera looked down at her hands. Emmett came around the counter. He looked at Vera and then at Garrett. "I'll drive her," he said, simply, directly. Garrett looked at him for a moment, the kind of look that takes a measurement. Then he nodded. Emmett went to the back and spoke quietly to the overnight tech. 3 sentences a handoff, the professional version of closing down one responsibility before taking on another. He came back with his keys and his coat. Outside, the bikes were lined in the parking lot in a row that stretched longer than Vera had imagined when she was inside. She stood at the door and looked at then the chrome, catching the parking lot lights, exhaust still faintly visible in the cold air. The men standing near them with the quiet patience of people who do not need to fill silence with noise. She had been afraid of this image for the last 15 minutes. She stood in the doorway and took a longer look and tried to reconcile what she saw with what she had felt. What she saw was organized, deliberate, not chaotic but calibrated the way serious people arrange themselves when they are serious about something. She walked to Emmett's car. He opened the passenger door without comment. She got in. The seat was warm almost immediately. He had started the car ahead of time, she realized, when he went to the back to speak with the overnight tech. He had started it so the car would be warm by the time she sat down. She did not say anything about this, but she noticed it in the way you notice things that are done quietly and without expectation of acknowledgement. The way she had always noticed those things because she had always been the one doing them. Emmett pulled out of the parking lot. In the side mirror, Vera watched the motorcycles begin to move, not roaring out, moving, smoothly with spacing falling into a formation around and behind Emmett's car that was so natural and practiced, it was clear they had done this before or something like it. 2 bikes moved ahead. The rest fell in around and behind. The road opened up in front of them and the headlights moved with it. Vera watched the formation in her mirror. She had seen motorcycle escorts before she had seen them at funerals, at parades, at veteran events. The solemnity of moving together in organized grief or organized honor. This felt like both of those things and neither of them. It felt like something she didn't have a word for yet. Her fear was still there, but it was changing texture. It was becoming something more like amazement. The particular amazement of a situation that has exceeded the categories you brought to it. In the car, Emmett drove and said nothing. He had the radio on low, not music, the quiet murmur of a sports broadcast, which somehow made the silence more comfortable rather than less, the way background sound in a room gives on silence somewhere to rest. After several blocks, Vera said, "Do I know you?" Emmett looked at the road ahead. His hands were easy on the wheel. He took a breath, not dramatic, just real. The breath of someone stepping towards something they had been walking toward for a while. "You knew a smaller version of me," he said. Vera studied the side of his face, the line of his jaw, the careful way he held himself. She looked for something familiar in those features and found the edge of something she couldn't quite reach. "From the school?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. He made a left turn, watched the bikes adjust in the mirror. "We're almost there," he said. And she understood from the way he said it that she was going to have to wait for the rest, that there was more and that it would come, but that tonight had its own order and some things had to happen before others. She looked out the window at the Columbus streets she had walked for decades, the corner stores she had passed 1,000 times, the church with the broken letter on its sign that had been broken for 2 years, the small, unremarkable geography of a life lived in one place. She was grateful for it suddenly, the specific and unremarkable fact of it. They reached her building. Emmett pulled in and stopped. The bikes pulled up along the curb in a row, organized and unhurried, engines cutting off one after another until the street was quiet in a way it hadn't been a few minutes ago. Vera looked up at the building, second floor, window dark. She thought of the empty refrigerator waiting upstairs, the dented soup can, the sticky note. Then she heard car doors and footsteps, and when she turned, she saw men carrying bags and boxes toward the entrance of the building, with the focused purpose of people who have jobs to do and are doing them, and none of it was performed, and none of it was asking for anything. And she had to turn back to the window for a moment because she was not ready for her face to be seen. Emmett said quietly, "It's okay to let this happen." She kept looking at the window. "I spent 24 years, she started. She stopped. He waited. "I spent 24 years making sure it didn't look like charity," she said. "Even when it was, I made sure it looked like nothing, like it was just the way things were. So nobody had to feel like this." "I know," Emmett said. She looked at him. "You were very good at it," he said. She didn't ask him how he knew. Not yet. The car was warm and the street was quiet, and she was very tired, and the knowing of it could wait a few more minutes. She got out. The stairs up to her apartment were the same stairs they had always been. 14 steps. The third one creaked. The handrail wobbled at the top. She had been meaning to call the building manager about the handrail for 6 months. Behind her footsteps, Wren was there, and two of the men Vera didn't know by name, yet carrying bags and boxes. Slade was beside her on the stairs, not touching her, not hovering, just close enough to catch her if the stairs did what the pharmacy floor had tried to do. At the top, Vera put her key in the door. She paused for just a moment before turning it. A last private second with the apartment as it had been empty and quiet, and hers alone in the way that had stopped being peaceful and started being something harder. She had not named what it had become. She had not had the language for it, or the time or the energy left over after managing everything else. She turned the key. The apartment was small and clean and cold in the way of rooms where the heat has been set low to save money. The kitchen opened directly off the entryway. The table had two chairs. One of them had been pushed slightly to the side, which is what happens when there is only one person, and the second chair just exists as furniture. Wren walked into the kitchen like she had been given permission, which she had been by the nod Vera had given at the door. She opened the cabinet under the sink and found the small pot without being told, and set it on the stove. She began unbagging groceries with the systematic efficiency of someone who believes that the most useful thing you can do for a person in need is be useful quickly and without theater. Garrett stood at the threshold of the apartment, in the doorway but not inside it. He had not crossed the threshold. He stood there with his arms crossed loosely, not blocking, just present, like a door frame that had decided to be a person. Vera stood at the edge of her own kitchen and watched a woman she had met 40 minutes ago put her groceries away, and felt a complicated and private sort of collapse happening inside her that she recognized as the body's long-deferred response to finally being allowed to stop. Slade pulled out the chair from the table, the one she used. Not the other one she would understand later, that he had noticed which one had the slight depression in the cushion, and set it at an angle that meant that she could sit and see the kitchen and the room without having her back to anything. "Sit," he said, gently. She sat. Wren put soup on the stove. One of the other men set a bottle of electrolyte drink on the table in front of Vera, with the care of someone placing something valuable. She looked at it. She looked at the label. She had not had one of these since Gerald had been in the hospital, and she had needed to keep herself going through the long waiting room days. She picked it up and drank. Emmett was in the corner of the room near the window. He had set his coat over the back of the second chair. the unused one, and stood with his arms folded and his eyes on the middle distance, thinking something through. She could see him doing it. The internal workings, visible at the surface, the way water moving fast, shows you the shape of what's underneath. The soup warmed, the apartment warmed. The sounds of people moving purposefully in a small space created something that Vera recognized from a long time ago as the sound of a household. Not hers, not specifically, but the general register of not being alone in a room. She had not heard it in a long time. Slade sat down across from her. He set his forearms on the table. He looked at her the way people look at you when they are about to say something that requires steadiness from both sides. "Mrs. Hollis," he said. His voice had changed from the pharmacy, still low, but the controlled caution of a stranger had given way to something that moved like it came from a longer distance. "Do you remember Truman Elementary, Columbus? The cafeteria there?" Vera looked at him. She looked at him the way you look at someone when a door has just opened in a wall you forgot had a door. She said, "I remember Truman." Slade said, "I was one of the kids there." Vera looked at his face. She was older now, and so was he, and the gap between a 46-year-old man and the children she had fed was wide, and many of them had passed through, and she had not always kept faces because you kept the moments more than the faces. You kept the gesture of the thing rather than its specific features. But something about his jaw, something about the set of his shoulders, the way he held stillness in his body like it had been learned rather than natural. "I think I remember you," she said slowly. And then the memory opened, not the one Slade was about to describe, but a different one, an earlier one he didn't know she had. A boy standing outside the school fence in the rain, not during school hours, after. Everyone had gone. She had been loading her car in the side parking lot, the one behind the cafeteria entrance, and she had seen him through the chain-link small wet, sitting on the curb across the street, with his backpack, not going anywhere, not doing anything, just sitting in the rain with nowhere to be. She had wrapped 2 plates of food from the day's service in foil, the way she always wrapped the extras. She had walked through the gate and across the street. She had set the food down next to him without asking what happened, without requiring explanation, without performing the adult authority of wanting to know everything before deciding to help. She had said, "You eat this okay, it'll get cold." And she had gone back inside. She had not thought of it again. Or rather, she had filed it in the category she kept for all of those moments, the wide and uncategorized drawer, where she put the things she did because they needed doing and not because she expected to carry them forward. She had never known his name. She looked at Slade across her kitchen table. He was telling her about the apples, about the way she used to slide an extra apple onto the tray without making eye contact, the small, practiced movement of it like sleight of hand. He was telling her what it felt like to be 9 years old with no lunch money and no explanation good enough for a stranger, and to have someone understand that without asking. His voice was steady. He was a man who had learned to carry things without showing the weight. But there was something underneath the steadiness that had age and distance in it, the kind of thing that lives in a person for decades in a room they don't often open. He said, "I never forgot you. I didn't know your name. I just knew the cafeteria lady with the red apron who never made me feel like a problem." Vera's hand was at her mouth. "I was that kid a lot of days," Slade said. "More than you probably knew." "I knew," Vera said. Her voice was barely there. He looked at her. "I always knew which kids," she said. "I just made sure they didn't know that I knew." Something moved in Slade's face that he did not try to control. It was brief, but it was real, the unmistakable passage of something felt all the way through. Wren set a bowl of soup on the table in front of Vera, a piece of bread beside it. She did it quietly without interrupting the instinct of someone who understood when the words in a room mattered more than her presence in it. Vera looked at the soup. She picked up the spoon, and with the first swallow her body did what bodies do when they have been waiting. It responded with a totality that bypassed the careful management of dignity she had been practicing for days. Her eyes filled. Not the neat kind of crying you can contain, the kind that comes when the physical and the emotional hit the same note at the same moment and the body decides it's done making a distinction between the two. She put the spoon down. She pressed her fingers to her eyes. She sat there in her own kitchen, which was no longer empty, with soup in front of her, and people she didn't know filling the space that had been hollow for longer than she wanted to admit. Garrett, still in the doorway, watched. He had the expression of a man who had seen this before and never found a way to be unmoved by it. The expression of someone who keeps showing up anyway. When Vera's breathing steadied when the soup was half gone and the bread was started, and some version of stability had reasserted itself, she looked up. She looked at Emmett still standing by the window. He was watching her with the particular attention of someone who has been waiting for a long time for a specific moment, and the moment has arrived, and there is no preparation for it that turns out to be sufficient. She did not know yet what she was seeing, but she was beginning to understand that there was something more to be told. That the evening had an architecture she had not yet fully seen. That the men in this room were not connected to each other only by Slade's phone call and Garrett's organizing instinct. That Emmett standing quietly in the corner with his arms folded and his eyes full of something long carried was not here by accident. She looked at him and something in her chest said, wait. She looked at him and something in his face said almost. Outside, the bike stood silent along the curb. The street was quiet. The night was doing what nights do, holding everything in place while the people inside them try to find their way through. The soup bowl was nearly empty. The bread was gone. The electrolyte drink stood half-finished on the table beside Vera's elbow, and the kitchen had taken on the particular warmth of a room that has been cold for a long time and is only now remembering what it was built for. Vera sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked at Emmett. He had not moved from his corner. He stood with the stillness of someone who had been practicing a specific kind of patience for a very long time, not the passive patience of waiting for something to happen, but the active patience of someone who has been carrying something toward a moment and has finally arrived at the edge of it. The room had quieted. Wren was in the kitchen moving with deliberate slowness, putting things away without clattering. Two of the men Vera didn't know by name had finished stacking boxes near the counter and had moved back toward the hallway with the natural instinct of people who understood when a room needed to contract. Garrett remained in the doorway. He had not moved from that threshold all evening. He stood with his arms crossed loosely and his eyes moving between Emmett and Vera, with the expression of someone who already knows the shape of what's coming and is standing guard over the space in which it will happen. Slade sat at the table. He was turned slightly sideways in his chair, forearms resting on his knees, looking at the floor with the focused quiet of a man who has said what he came to say and is now waiting to see what it opened. Vera said, Emmett. He looked at her. You said you knew a smaller version of me. Yes. What did you mean? He unfolded his arms. He took a breath that was not dramatic, just real, the breath of someone stepping through a door they have been standing outside for a long time. He walked from the corner and pulled the second chair from the table, the unused one, the one that had been pushed to the side, and set it across from Vera and sat down. He sat the way people sit when they are about to say something true. Not performatively, not with the posture of a story being told for effect, but with the slightly forward, slightly open stillness of someone removing something they have been carrying and setting it on the table between them. He said, I knew your name before tonight, Mrs. Hollis. Vera looked at him. I've known it since I was 8 years old. The kitchen was completely quiet. Even Wren had stopped moving. Emmett looked at his hands for a moment, then back up. Truman Elementary, he said. I was in 3rd grade, 8 years old. I don't remember the exact year, I just remember the Tuesday. Vera's breath shifted. My father drank, Emmett said. Not with drama, with the flat factual tone of someone who has made peace with a truth by saying it plainly enough at times that it has lost its jagged edges. My mother worked nights at a nursing home on Broad Street. I got myself to school most mornings. I got myself there early, usually because the school was warmer than our apartment, and there was nobody home to tell me not to leave yet. He paused. I didn't have lunch money most days, he said. Not because my parents didn't care. My mother cared. She just had nothing left by the 3rd week of the month. I knew that. I was 8, but I knew it, the way kids know things, not in words, but in the feeling of watching someone try very hard at something that isn't working. Vera was absolutely still. I got good at looking like I wasn't hungry, Emmett said. I got good at finding things to do during lunch that kept me away from the line. I'd organize my backpack. I'd ask the teacher if she needed help with something. Anything that let me not stand in that line without money and have someone look at me the way I was afraid they'd look at me. He looked at Vera directly. And then one day I got there late and the room was almost empty and I didn't have a choice. I had to go through the line and I stood there with my tray and you were behind the counter. You had your red apron on. I remember it was a Tuesday because we always had the square pizza on Tuesdays, and I could smell it from the hallway. He paused. I got to the register, and I didn't say anything. I just stood there, and I watched your face to see what it was going to do. Vera's hand moved to her throat. You didn't look at the register, Emmett said. You looked at me, and then you put an apple on my tray, and you said, he stopped. His jaw worked for a moment. He looked at the table, then back up. You said, baby, you can't learn on an empty stomach. And then you waved me through without touching the register at all, like it had already been handled, like there was nothing to discuss. The silence in the room had a texture to it now, a weight. I went and sat down, Emmett said, and I ate, and it was the square pizza, and it was not a good pizza by any objective measure, and I have eaten at some very good restaurants in the years since, and I have never in my life eaten anything that tasted the way that pizza tasted on that Tuesday. Vera's eyes were full. I went home that afternoon and I told my mother, Emmett said. I told her there was a woman at school who made sure I ate, and my mother sat down at the kitchen table and she cried. Not in front of me, she went to the bathroom and turned the water on, but I was 8 and I knew. He paused. She cried because someone had covered for her when she couldn't cover herself, and nobody had asked her to explain or justify or prove she deserved the help. Vera said his name. Just that. Just Emmett. The way you say a name when the word is doing something much larger than a name usually does. I decided that day, he said, that I was going to do something where I could give people what you gave me. I tried pre-med. I didn't make it all the way through. I finished pharmacy school instead, and I have spent 15 years making sure people get their medication, and I have thought about you more times than I can count. He looked at her steadily. You were not a footnote. You were the whole chapter. Vera pressed her fingers to her mouth. The tears came, and she did not try to stop them. She was 61 years old, and she was in her own kitchen, and she was too tired and too fed and too overwhelmed to perform composure. I didn't know, she said. Her voice was barely sound. I didn't know I was doing something to remember. She stopped. I just couldn't let a child be hungry in front of me. That was all it was. I know, Emmett said. That's what made it matter. He reached into the pocket of his coat, which was folded over the back of his chair, and he produced a folded piece of paper. He set it on the table in front of Vera. This is the completed application for the Federal Pharmaceutical Assistance Program, he said. Your insurance situation qualifies you at the highest tier. Your heart medication will cost you nothing going forward. The paperwork is done. It just needs your signature. Vera looked at the paper. I finished it last week, he said, when I saw your file. I should have reached out then. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. He paused. Tonight wasn't a moment I planned, but it was the right one. Vera looked up at him. You did all of this? It's my job, he said, simply. And then it's also more than my one, in this case. From the doorway, Garrett spoke for the first time in a long while. His voice was low and measured the voice of a man who uses his words the way you choose footing on uncertain ground deliberately with full weight. Mrs. Hollis, he said, there's one more thing. Vera looked at him. He stepped inside the apartment. It was the first time he had crossed the threshold all evening. He moved to the edge of the room and stood there, not close enough to crowd, but inside, present in a new way. I didn't go to your school, he said. I've never been to Truman Elementary. I'm from Dayton originally, Millbrook Elementary. I was maybe 9, 10 years old. Vera waited. There was a woman at Millbrook, Garrett said. Same job as yours. Her name was Mrs. Whitfield. She ran the cafeteria there for 30 years. He paused. I was one of those kids too. My father wasn't around. My mother was doing everything she could. Mrs. Whitfield, she did what you did. She just made sure. She didn't make you feel it. She just made sure. He was quiet for a moment. She passed away in 2019, he said. I drove to Dayton for the funeral. Packed church. Half the people there were adults who had been her kids coming back from all over the state. He looked at Vera with the directness of a man who has no interest in softening things that don't need softening. At the service, they read from something she had written when she first took the job, a note she had kept in her apron pocket apparently. something she wrote for herself to remind herself of what the job was for. Vera's hands went still in her lap. Garrett said, "The line that stuck with me was, 'The hungry ones never ask, always check the quiet kids.'" The room did not move. Vera heard the words and felt them land in some specific place below. Language below thought, in the part of the body where certain truths live, because the mind would make them too complicated. She looked down at her purse, which was sitting on the floor beside her chair. Her hands moved before her mind directed them. She reached into the purse and found her wallet, and from her wallet she drew out a small, folded piece of paper worn at the creases, the kind of worn that comes from being handled many times and then left alone for a long time. She unfolded it. The writing was hers. The ink was faded to a color that meant years rather than months. The paper had gone soft at the folds and yellow at the edges. She looked at it. The words were familiar, and they were not familiar. The way the words of something you wrote a long time ago are yours, and also the words of a person who was you, but had less of the years on them, less of the weight, less of the knowledge of what the years were going to ask. The hungry ones never ask. Always check the quiet kids. She had written it in 1998, her first year at Truman. She had written it on a sticky note and tucked it into the pocket of her apron and kept it there and forgotten it and found it and kept it again. And somewhere in the geography of decades, it had migrated from the apron to the wallet and from the wallet to the purse. And she had stopped seeing it the way you stop seeing things that have been in your peripheral vision for so long, they become part of the background of your life. She held it in her hands and read it and felt something happen in her chest that she did not have a word for. It was not exactly joy. It was not exactly grief. It was the feeling of a circle closing not neatly, not with the clean click of a lock, but with the slow, unmistakable recognition of a shape that has been present the whole time and has only now become visible. She had written these words. Mrs. Whitfield in Dayton had lived by these words independently in the same language because some truths arrive in the same form to different people working toward the same thing. And those words, her words, Mrs. Whitfield's words, the words of every woman who had ever stood behind a cafeteria counter and quietly without fanfare covered the gap between what a child had and what a child needed, those words had circled back tonight in the mouth of a man who had driven from Dayton for a funeral and remembered a sentence and come here tonight because Slade had called, and Slade's call had connected to something older and more fundamental than one phone call. She looked at Emmett, at Slade, at Garrett in the doorway, at Wren standing in the kitchen entrance with her arms folded and her eyes very bright. She said, "All of you." Nobody spoke. "All of you," she said again, not as an accusation, not as a question, but as the statement of a woman arriving at the full dimensions of something she had only partially seen before. "You all carried this," Slade said, "for a long time." She looked at her hands. The sticky note lay across her fingers, soft with age and handling. "I didn't know," she said. "I never thought of it as I just did it. Every day. It was just a job." "That's what made it real," Emmett said. Garrett said, "The ones that stick are always the ones that didn't feel like they were performing anything." Wren crossed to the table and sat down in the chair beside Vera, not across from her, but beside her close. She didn't touch her, just sat near her in the way of someone keeping company with a person who has just seen something large and needs a body nearby to confirm that the ground is still there. Vera sat with all of it for a moment. The kitchen, the full refrigerator, the medication in its bag on the counter, the paper in her hands, the faces in the room. Then Garrett straightened. He unfolded his arms, and he put his hands in his jacket pockets, and he looked at Vera with the clarity of a man making a statement he has already fully decided on. "Same day, same time, every week," he said. "Groceries. We'll work out what you need and we'll bring it. No cameras, no posts. Nobody's going to put this on the internet, and nobody's going to make you perform gratitude for it." He paused. "You don't owe us anything. You never did. This isn't a transaction." Vera opened her mouth. Garrett said, "Don't argue about it." She closed her mouth. The smallest thing happened in the room. Then Slade made a sound that was almost not a laugh, and Wren pressed her lips together, and even Emmett's expression shifted by a fraction. And it was brief, and it was human, and it was the first moment all evening that felt like something other than the gravity of large things. Vera looked at Garrett. "You're a stubborn man." "Yes, ma'am," he said without apology. She looked around the room once more, At each face, she let herself look fully the way she had stopped letting herself look at people when looking meant needing something from them. She said, "Why didn't any of you say anything sooner about who you were? About knowing me?" Emmett answered, "Because you would have said you were fine." She sat with that. She turned it over. She held it up to the light of everything she knew about herself, and she could not find a fault in it. "Yes," she said quietly. "I would have." "I know," he said. "I've been watching your prescription file for 2 years. I've seen the patterns. I've seen what you've been managing and what it's been costing you. I kept waiting for an opening that wouldn't embarrass you." He paused. "I waited too long. Tonight was too close." Vera looked at him steadily. "You stayed," she said. "I stayed." After 45 minutes in that pharmacy and the drive here and all of this, she gestured at the room, at the evening, at everything the last 2 hours had contained. "You stayed." "Of course," he said, as if there were no other option that had presented itself. Vera picked up the pharmaceutical assistant's paperwork from the table where he had placed it. She looked at it. She looked at the signature line at the bottom, which was the only thing standing between her and never having to do the arithmetic on that sticky note again, at least not for this. She looked at Emmett. "Do you have a pen?" He reached into his coat pocket and produced one. He set it on the table beside the paperwork. She signed her name. Her handwriting was steady. She noted that it was steady and felt something about that, some small private satisfaction in the fact that after all of tonight, her hand was not shaking when it needed to do something. She handed the paperwork back to Emmett. He folded it once and put it in his coat pocket with the practiced care of someone handling something that matters. "I'll have this processed by Thursday," he said. Vera nodded. The room began slowly and without announcement to organize itself toward departure. This happened the way things do when they are genuine rather than performed without a formal signal, without anyone standing and saying time to go. Just the natural movement of people who have done what they came to do and understand that lingering past the natural end of a thing is its own kind of imposition. Two of the men Vera had never been formally introduced to appeared in the kitchen doorway and nodded at Garrett. He nodded back. They were gone. Wren stood from the table. She looked at Vera for a moment with the direct, warm, entirely unsentimental regard that Vera had noticed in her from the beginning, the look of someone who does not dress things up, but does not harden them either. She went to the kitchen counter. She reached into the last remaining mug and she took something out and set it on the top shelf of the refrigerator in the front where it would be the first thing seen when the door was opened. A red apple. She did not comment on it. She closed the refrigerator door and walked back to the table and picked up her jacket. "You're going to be all right," Wren said. "Not as a comfort, as an assessment." Vera looked at her. "You don't know that." "No," Wren said, "but you made it through tonight. That tells me most of what I need to know." She touched Vera's shoulder once, brief, firm, the touch of a person who does not make the gesture often and means it completely when they do. Then she walked to the door. Slade stood from the table. He buttoned his jacket and looked at Vera with the expression of a man on the other side of something he had needed for a long time and had not known how much he needed until it happened. He said, "Next Thursday, 4:30. Vera said, "You don't have to." He looked at her. His expression did not change. "We do," he said. She looked at him, at the man who had been the small, wet boy sitting on the curb in the rain outside the school fence, while she carried a foil wrapper pointed across the street without asking any questions. She had not known his name then. She knew it now. "Slade," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you," she said, "for calling them." He nodded once. The nod of a man who does not need the thanks but receives it because refusing it would be its own kind of unkindness. He walked out. Garrett was last. He stood in the doorway on the threshold where he had spent most of the evening, the man who guards the edge of things. He looked at Vera across the small apartment, across the kitchen with its full refrigerator and its warm stove, and the single bowl in the dish rack that Wren had washed and left to dry. Across the table with its two chairs, one of which had been pushed to the side for so long that it had become furniture rather than invitation. He said, "Mrs. Whitfield used to say that the work you do quietly is the work that lasts." Vera sat with that. She was right, she said. Garrett gave a single nod. The nod of a man who has been carrying a sentence from a dead woman's funeral and has finally found the right place to set it down. He turned and walked down the stairs. She heard the creak of the third step. She heard the front door of the building open and close. She heard a moment later the engines outside beginning one, then several, then many. The deep and organized sound of them pulling away from the curb in their unhurried formation, the sound diminishing down the block until it became something between sound and memory. Then it was gone. Vera sat at her kitchen table in the silence. It was not the same silence it had been this morning. This morning the silence had been the silence of things that are empty. This was a different kind, the silence of things that have been full and are now resting. The silence after. She looked at the apartment, the stacked groceries on the counter. The pot Ren had washed still warm on the stove. Emmett's chair pushed slightly back from where he had been sitting. The pharmaceutical paperwork gone from the table now in a coat pocket, heading back toward a pharmacy where tomorrow someone would file it, and the month after that, Vera's medication would cost her nothing. She picked up the sticky note that was still on the table. The old one. The one from 1998 that had lived in her apron pocket and her wallet and her purse for 26 years without her fully knowing it was there. She read it one more time. The hungry ones never ask. Always check the quiet kids. She had written this at 35 years old, her first year at Truman News to the law, and afraid of missing something important. She had folded it and kept it close and then forgotten it was close, and then it had become part of the background of her life, present and invisible. The way the best principles are not pinned on a wall, where you can see them but stitched into the fabric of how you move through rooms. She had lived by this without knowing she was still holding it, and it had come back to her tonight in the voice of a man from Dayton, quoting a woman from a different cafeteria, a different school, a different decade, the same words, the same truth, because some truths arrive in the same form to anyone who is paying the right kind of attention. She folded the note carefully. She put it back in her wallet. Not in the loose pocket where things get lost, but in the front sleeve behind the photo of Pam, where she would see it every time she opened the wallet. She sat for a little while longer. She was not ready to move yet. The body, when it has been through something, has its own timeline for returning to ordinary motion, and she respected that. She had always respected that in the children. You don't rush them back to the line when they've needed a minute. You let them take the minute. She took the minute. Then she picked up her phone from the table. It was at 11%. She had meant to charge it and kept not charging it, the small negligences of a person managing too many things. She plugged it in and waited until it had enough to make a call, and then she found Pam's name and pressed it. It rang twice. Mom. Pam's voice slightly surprised Vera, rarely called on weeknights. Is everything okay? Vera looked at the refrigerator, at the groceries on the counter, at the two chairs at the kitchen table, and the slight impression in the cushion of the one she always used. She thought of every Sunday call, every fine she had offered up like a clean bill of health, every don't worry she had deployed like a tool. I need to tell you something, she said. Pam was quiet for a moment. Okay. I've been struggling, Vera said. For a while, I should have told you sooner. I kept saying I was fine because I didn't want to, she paused. I didn't want to be a problem. Mom, I'm okay, Vera said. I want you to hear that first. I'm okay right now. Tonight I'm actually okay. She paused. But I need help, and I'm asking for it. The silence on the line had a different quality than the silences of the Sunday calls. It was the silence of something real passing between two people who had been speaking around the real thing for long enough. Pam said, and her voice was careful with the effort of not breaking, tell me everything. Vera told her, not all of it, not that night, there was too much and the night had already been too full, but the essential parts, the medication, the math on the sticky note, the pharmacy, the men who had shown up, Emmett, Slade, what had been said at the kitchen table. She talked for a long time. Pam listened without interrupting more than once or twice. Vera could hear her daughter's breathing change and steady and change again as the picture assembled itself. When Vera finished, there was a pause. Then Pam said, I'm coming out there. Vera started to say, you don't have to. She stopped herself. Okay, she said instead. Just that, just okay. The word that means I am going to let this happen. I am going to stop pretending the second chair at this table is just furniture. After she hung up, Vera sat for another few minutes. Then she stood. She moved to the refrigerator and she opened it and she looked at what was inside. It was full. The kind of full a refrigerator should be stacked with things that meant multiple days, things that meant choices, things that meant she did not have to do the arithmetic before she decided whether to eat. On the top shelf in the front, where Ren had placed it without comment, the red apple. Vera reached in and took it. She closed the refrigerator door. She stood in her kitchen, warm now, fully warm. The heat no longer kept low to save money, but running as it was supposed to run, and she held the apple in both hands the way you hold something you want to feel completely before you do anything else with it. She thought of the children. She thought of the years of apples slid onto trays without eye contact. She thought of the look on a child's face when you give them something they needed without making them name the particular relief of being seen without being exposed. She had given that to them. She had given it without accounting for it, without recording it, without expecting it to come back to her in any form. It had come back to her tonight in 38 motorcycles, in a signed piece of paper, in a bowl of soup, in a man saying, "I've known your name since I was 8 years old," and another man saying, "The hungry ones never ask," in the voice of someone quoting the dead. She sat down at the kitchen table at her chair, the one with the slight depression in the cushion. She set the apple on the table in front of her. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she picked it up and bit into it. It was crisp and cold and very sweet, the kind of sweet that lands in the back of the throat and stays there. She chewed slowly. She looked at the kitchen, at the light, at the ordinary and specific details of her own home that had felt like a verdict for so long and now felt simply like a place where she lived. Outside, the street was quiet. The night was doing what nights do, holding the city in its dark and patient hands, keeping things in place, while the people inside them find their way from one moment to the next. Vera ate her apple. She did not count the cost of it. She did not calculate what it meant against anything else. She simply ate it in her warm kitchen at her table with the refrigerator full behind her and the sticky note in her wallet and her daughter's voice still present in the air of the room. She ate until it was done.